Good evening, everyone. I think minutes past 7, we might, in the interest of time, get started. My name is Derek Scully. I'm Head of Corporate Affairs at Energia Group, and real pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar this evening. What we will try and do is get you in and out in an hour. I think, given the times we're in, it's unfortunate we're not all in a room together where we could have this chat, but look, we're going to work at this format today, and hopefully, as you'll see, there's plenty more consultation planned. We'll have our next one in person. So with that in mind, and I suppose with an hour to go, really one or two little bits of housekeeping. This webinar, as you'll see, is being recorded. We are going to have questions. The details for this I can give you in a minute, but they're also at the bottom of every slide. And I just want to thank everybody who has already submitted questions in your registration form, and for those of you who took the time to obviously to register and to go onto the website and have a look around. So I don't need to worry about the pen and paper for the text number. Just to note that the text isn't by WhatsApp, it's just by SMS and email. And for any questions that we don't get to this evening, we will be providing an answer to all of the questions on the website, and this recording will also be posted there. So we just move on, and I can introduce you to the team that's here with me this evening. They'll all introduce themselves as we go through. But as I said, in terms of structure, I'm just going to give you a very brief overview to the group. I will, in that, provide a little bit of context as to where we are. Then I'll hand you across to Owen and Caroline, who'll go through some of the project details. Amy will give you an overview of some of our partnership arrangements, and Rosie will go through some of the stakeholder engagement that we do and some of the plans for this project into the future. Rosie will also then take us through the Q&A towards the end. And as you'll see at the bottom of this slide, as is at the bottom of every other slide, you'll see the details for the questions if you want to submit them as we go through this presentation. So if we just go to the next slide, I can start to give you a bit of an introduction to Energia Group. We are one of Ireland's leading energy companies. We're over 20 years experience in the market, both in terms of infrastructure investment, power station, and also in the supply of customers. So we've over 820,000 customers now across the island of Ireland. We supply about 20% of all of the electricity on the island, and about a quarter of all of the wind power that's generated on the island to date. So we have, in that, created community development funds to date, where approximately 550,000 per annum, or about 2 million to date, has gone to local communities as part of our renewable projects. As a group, we employ about 916 people today, and also earlier this year, we're really proud to have been given to have earned, I suppose, the Business Working Responsibly mark from Business in the Community, which makes us one of just 40 companies across the island of Ireland to have achieved this mark for our commitment not just to communities but also to our workforce and activities around climate action. So to date, you'll see there as well, the group has invested about €1 billion on the island. And one thing I'll touch on in a little bit is our Positive Energy Investment Programme, which is a €3 billion investment programme intended to help Ireland achieve our 2030 climate targets. And again, this is something that I will touch on in just a moment. On the next slide, what we have, I suppose, is the general context for where we are today. Earlier this year, we had the IPCC report published, which was alarmingly called a code red for humanity. It, for the first time, scientifically shows that where we are today in terms of climate change is in part human driven. Now, rather than sit around and point the finger at everybody, what that means is if we caused it, we can fix it. And clearly, I think the important message in terms of Mary Robinson's response to this is about the time for action is now. And in fact, the report itself suggests that if we're to continue just on our current trajectories, the 1.5 to 2 degree temperature increase that we want to try and achieve by 2050 will happen in just 12 years. So really important that we act, and it's important that we take into account all of the things and all of the measures that are potentially going to be able to contribute to this. One of the things probably worth noting in an Irish context, away from the global context, is the Met Éireann report, again published around this year, which looks at the impact of climate change in Ireland. And since 1990, 15 of the 20 warmest years on record have happened. Like that, it's hard to sort of start to contemplate that, but the change that's happening in our climate is rapid, and it's all around us. In terms of sea rise, we've seen that. In terms of acidity in the sea, we've seen an increase in that as well. There's really significant changes, as well as sea not just temperature, but sea levels. So we need to act now, and that's a global imperative. So in terms of what Ireland's doing next, what we've done is set out well exactly where is Ireland in this challenge. So we just go to the next slide. What we have here, I suppose, going back to 2019, Ireland published a climate action plan. The intention in that climate action plan was a whole raft of measures across the entire economy to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 25%. This included a commitment to 70% renewable electricity and a very significant amount of offshore wind to be delivered. Now, the focus on offshore wind is important. It's a resource that's available to Ireland, but it's also one of the cheapest and most effective ways of electrifying our power system, and electrification is the key to our decarbonisation. That's been recognised globally, but if we look then at what has continued to happen in this area, Ireland published a national energy and climate plan as part of the European Union's commitments to climate change. And in that, there's a huge focus on the rapid deployment of renewable electricity, and in particular, offshore wind. The scale of the change here, even at a 25% reduction or 3.5% annual reduction, calls for this sort of rapid movement. The programme for government then increased this target to 5 gigawatts. Then earlier this year, we had legally binding legislation come into Ireland, which copper fastens the legally binding requirement from the European Commission. But in it, in the Climate Action Low Carbon Development Bill, what Ireland committed to is not 3.5% annual reduction that's in the Climate Action Plan, but a 7% reduction, equivalent to halving our current, or the 2018 global greenhouse gas emissions in just 10 years. The scale of that is huge. The ambition is immense. And how do we do that? We do it with the electrification of heat, transport, and as much renewable electricity into the system as we need. So we then had a national development plan published only just a couple of weeks ago. The 70% target for renewable electricity has now jumped to 80%. So what we're saying is 80% of the time, the electricity we're going to consume in Ireland will come from renewable sources. That requires a huge investment to get to that level in onshore wind, but specifically in offshore wind, which can deliver cost effectively and at scale. So what we need to do, what Ireland has set itself as a target, is really, really ambitious. But what is identified, not just in all of these programs and plans, but globally, is that offshore wind provides a cost-effective solution. It allows homes and businesses to affect the sort of change that they want to make. And this change in halving our emissions in 10 years requires action from everybody. But by providing renewable electricity to the system, it allows people avail of things like EVs. It allows heat and transport decarbonise by switching to renewable electricity and away from oil and gas. So these are all really, really important changes and transitions. Now, I know, just to pick up on one or two questions that have come through already, or to us earlier, is sort of, well, why are we doing this? Why, if we can supply electricity today, are we doing this into the future? And I think the imperative is clear, right? And offshore wind and electrification is the proven and express way in which we can easiest and most cost effectively decarbonise. It's recognised not just in all of these plans, but it's recognised globally, even by the UN, the European Commission, and elsewhere. So that's what we're going to do. Why is Energia doing it? Well, I sort of mentioned this at the outset. we are one of the leading companies on the island. We have invested significantly in wind assets and in electricity generation to date. And we want to remain at the forefront of this. So if the future of our sector is in renewable electricity, well, then we want to be at the forefront of that. And it's why we followed the signals, we followed the clear indications from Ireland and other countries that offshore wind is a priority. We're now operational in offshore wind with projects like this. But I want to stress, this is a very early stage in the project, and the guys will talk to this. But why are we looking at it? It's for this very reason. I mean, the challenge of decarbonisation is immense. The opportunity presented by offshore wind is equally exciting for Ireland, and we'll touch on some of those opportunities as we go through this presentation. So just to quickly just give you an overview in terms of, it's not just offshore wind in energy. Our positive energy programme, which just on the next slide, gives you an indication of just how seriously we're taking this. So a 3 billion investment programme is in place. It'll create, through construction operation, 3,000 to 5,000 jobs. We're focused on offshore wind with projects across the island that are in planning and proceeding to construction. We're building battery storage in the system, a 50 megawatt unit at the moment. We have a bioenergy facility that we're also at stage of commissioning, which is much more about the circular economy, and 100,000 tonnes of brown and black bin waste. We'll go through that. We've large-scale solar projects, utility scale solar, a large amount of which has been through planning in Meath, but an overall portfolio of about 500 megawatts. We have customer solutions, which is about providing customers with more information, allowing them to get more involved in their energy future. And again, on the hydrogen side, and this is something, again, one or two questions will come in on, but on hydrogen, we're looking at this. We've already got a demonstration project where we're providing hydrogen to public buses. We're also involved in a number of maritime studies, along with universities and industry experts, around the use of hydrogen in the future in the economy. But the focus today and the focus of this project is on offshore wind specifically. And as you'll be aware, we've two significant projects at this very early stage. The North Celtic Sea wind project, which Owen's going to talk to you about in just a second, is obviously one of the most significant, the focus of this presentation. So I think rather than keep going on with our overall plans, you're probably much keen to hear about the project itself. So I will hand you over to Owen.
Thanks very much, Derek, and good evening, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to speak to you today. So as Derek mentioned, my name's Owen Partland, and I'm the Offshore Renewables Manager with Energia, and so I lead the development of our offshore projects. So this evening, and specifically the North Celtic Sea project, it's an early stage proposed offshore wind farm off the coast of Waterford, and the area that we're currently assessing is shown in the graphic on the right, and it's from a minimum of 10 kilometers from the shore and extends right out to 25 kilometers from the shore. And where this area came about from was probably 2 years ago at this stage. We would have undertaken a really detailed study, both looking at environmental and engineering characteristics all around the coast of Ireland, using both Irish and international expertise to assess suitable areas for the development of offshore wind, and this is one of the areas that came out of that assessment. And that assessment is still ongoing. We're looking at, again, the engineering characteristics of the area. We're looking more detailed at the environmental assessment, and as that assessment continues, we don't have a firm view in terms of the overall capacity, but we expect that a project of between 600 and 800 megawatts may be suitable for this particular area. And at the moment, that would be between 40 and 60 turbines. So then to put that into further context, that would be a project of that scale would supply sufficient clean electricity for over 500,000 homes and businesses. So if you can go to the next slide, please, Dan. So this gives a really high level overview of an offshore wind farm. And that area I mentioned, out from sort of starting at a minimum of 10 and out to 25, is the area that we're assessing for suitability for offshore wind turbines. So each of those offshore wind turbines are founded in a foundation, and then there's a cable that will be buried suitably under the seabed, and that would run back to an offshore substation. So once all the turbines are connected to that offshore substation, there'd then be an export cable, which again is buried in the seabed, right up to the landfall point. And the landfall point is where the export cable changes from a submarine cable to an onshore cable. But again, that remains all the way underground until it connects to either an existing substation on the transmission network or an overhead line. And then there's the operation and maintenance facility, which would be located adjacent to the offshore wind farm array as well. And we can talk about that a little bit more detail in the later slides. So then if you go on to the next slide, Dan, just to talk about the overall project timeline and really to give you a context of how all these activities fit together to ultimately moving towards construction and operations. So back in 2019, we would have kicked off our environmental surveys, and Caroline will talk about those in a couple of slides. In terms of our engineering design, we've recently been awarded foreshore licenses, and what those licenses allow us to do is to undertake studies that will give us a better indication and a better understanding of the seabed conditions. So that's geotechnical surveys, which allow us to take samples, and geophysical surveys, which allow us to use sound waves to really determine what's below and above the seabed. So each of those inputs will feed into an overall planning application that will be mainly driven by the environmental side, and we'd be aiming to submit a planning application in early to mid 2023. We'd expect that process with onboard Planola would take 12 months. And then if we're successful, if the project was granted planning, we'd be eligible to enter into a res auction. And ultimately what that is it allows the North Celtic Sea project to compete with other offshore projects to provide electricity at the lowest cost to the consumer on a long-term basis. Again, if we're successful through that process, we then move towards our final design, our procurement, and then into construction. But I suppose the key point of a project like this is to ensure that we're operational in advance of 2030, because that allows us to contribute to Ireland's 2030 target that Derek touched on in terms of 5 gigawatts of offshore wind by that time. One key element, and I'm conscious Rosie will talk about this in a bit more detail, but one key element throughout all this process, and it's really been ongoing since 2019 and will continue throughout the life of the project, is that ongoing community and fisheries liaison. So we kicked that off in 2019. That process will be open as we progress this project, and it's really the importance of the early engagement that we have, webinars such as this, but also communication on an ongoing basis. It isn't limited to these consultation periods, and certainly we're going to progress that as we go through the next phases of public consultation as well. So on the next slide, I'll talk specifically about the benefits, and I think it's important to recognise that the benefits of the project like the North Celtic Sea would bring are significant. So very upfront and centre, the point that Derek touched on in relation to reducing Ireland's greenhouse gas emissions, that's a really significant one, and the point around scale and the need to be able to do it within the coming decade is one that the North Celtic Sea project can deliver, and it can deliver at scale. In terms of the overall project investment and looking at the level of that investment, we estimate a €2 billion investment would be what would be required for the North Celtic Sea. And at the moment, we're estimating that we would be able to maintain and keep 500 million of that within the Irish national and regional economy. But we're also looking at how we could increase that percentage that's retained within Ireland. And one of the really key points for that is looking at Ireland's infrastructure. So we have a number of ports around the country. As of yet, none of those ports are suitable for offshore wind, but we're working both at an industry level and directly with each of those ports to understand how they can benefit from these projects and the sort of infrastructure upgrades that they can undertake in order to be able to facilitate a project like the North Celtic Sea to be delivered. Then in terms of employment during the construction phase, we're estimating approximately 800 jobs during that construction phase. A really significant area is the long-term operational jobs, and that's between 70 and 100 full-time jobs during the operational phase of the project, and that's between 25 and 30 years. So those are local jobs, and they're local to the overall project, and that's a really significant area because it allows a broad set of skills to be employed by that facility, and it's something that we're progressing at the moment. And then finally, in terms of the Community Benefit Fund, a project of this scale would provide a substantial community benefit fund, and it would be a multi-million euro fund that would be paid out on an annual basis, and that's paid out to community initiatives and fisheries initiatives. And again, Rosie will talk about some of the funds that we're currently involved in projects that are actually operational across the island. So I'll hand over to Caroline to talk about our progress to date on the projects.
Hi everyone, thanks Owen. So I'm Caroline Roach and I'm looking after the environmental and the consenting element of the proposed North Celtic Sea project. I've been working on this project for the past 2 years now, and I'm delighted to be able to speak with you all this evening to fill you in on what's been happening to date. So back in 2019, we made an application for a foreshore licence to the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage. A foreshore licence is the permission to undertake certain types of surveys, and I'll go into these in more detail on the next slide. You may already be aware that this foreshore licence was granted a number of weeks ago, and this will allow us to carry out these surveys in the near future. And this will provide us with the essential information to progress the project design and ultimately to progress the environmental assessments. So in the meantime, then, we have been able to progress a number of surveys that did not require the foreshore licence. And since 2019, we've had a team of highly experienced ornithologists or bird specialists and marine mammal experts carrying out monthly seabird and marine mammal surveys across the site. And 24 months of data is required for this element. Birds are one of the animal species that are given key consideration when we design a wind farm, and therefore we need to have as much detailed information on their presence across the area as possible. We also have bird experts carrying out seabird breeding surveys of the cliffs between Tramore and Minehead, of where there's 2 special protection areas for birds in along those cliffs. And we also have bird migration surveys being carried out from a number of coastal locations, and these focus on the migration routes of ducks and geese and what routes that they take when they come into overwinter in Dungarvan and Tramore, and both of these are also special protection areas. In addition to this, then, fisheries is also another key area that requires focused attention during the early design stages of the project. And our fisheries liaison officers, our FLOs, with assistance from local fishermen, have been carrying out fishing activity surveys in the area. So birds, mammals and fisheries are areas where the more data we have, the better. And that's why it was crucial for us to start these surveys as early as we could. And just to say here as well on fisheries, so we have had a number of questions on this in advance of the webinar. So I do have a specific slide coming up on that shortly. In 2020, then, we commenced the Environmental Impact Assessment, or the EIA process. And the purpose of the EIA is to determine any potential effects that the proposed wind farm might have on the environment. And while this project will play a key role in our fight against the climate crisis, as Derek has mentioned previously, we're also facing a biodiversity crisis. And as such, we must ensure that this project is delivered in a way that is sensitive to the marine environment and that it will protect and enhance it. And I think this is very much achievable, and the EIA process is key to that. The EIA itself has been prepared in accordance with best practice and current guidance, and it's been carried out by a team of highly experienced specialists, so ranging from archaeologists, marine ecologists, fisheries experts, noise experts, landscape and visual experts, to name but a few. And all stages of the project will be assessed as part of this EIA. So that'll be the construction stage, the operational stage, and the decommissioning stage. And the EIA will involve consultation with key stakeholders, with prescribed bodies, and with the public, and this is the first introductory consultation phase as part of that. We're currently at the constraints and the optioneering phase, and so once we have the project design progressed a little bit further, we will be preparing the EIA scoping report. And the scoping report sets out all of the topics that we will need to assess as part of the EIA, and we will also be going out to public consultation on that in 2022, and your feedback on that will also be key to us. In addition to the Fisheries Liaison Officer that I just mentioned, we also have a Community Liaison Officer who's continuing to engage and consult with all members of the community. We can go on to the next slide there. So we are undertaking a range of surveys. Some of these are ongoing and some are planned for the near future. So with regards to the physical environment, so these are predominantly the surveys that we need a foreshore licence to carry out. We will be undertaking geophysical surveys, which will gather data on water depth, on seabed features, sediment type, geohazards and archaeological features. We'll also be doing geotechnical surveys, which will basically collect samples from the seabed to determine the sediment properties. And then there will also be met ocean, and these are associated with the sea conditions and wind speed. So these types of surveys will help determine the most suitable turbine positions, the foundation types, the installation methods for those foundations, and then the cable routes. And we'll also be carrying out a range of onshore studies over the coming 18 months, which will assess landfall site suitability and onshore cable route options. From an ecological perspective then, so as I mentioned previously, the bird and mammal surveys are well underway and these are going to continue for a minimum of 24 months. We'll also be carrying out surveys to determine the habitats on and in the seabed, in the water column, in the intertidal areas where the cables will come ashore, and then also along the cable route options and the grid connection locations. From a human perspective then, as I mentioned, we are currently undertaking those fishing activity surveys to understand the commercial fishing activity in the area. And we've also completed a number of archaeological, navigation and grid assessments. Upcoming surveys then will include landscape and visuals, traffic and navigation, noise and vibration surveys, archaeology and cultural heritage, socioeconomic and tourism and amenity studies. And again, some of the questions that we have received in advance of this webinar include concerns about EMF or electromagnetic fields, airborne noise, underwater noise, and all of these will be comprehensively addressed as part of the EIA. The results then of all of these surveys will feed into the EIA and they'll feed into the design of the project. So once we know what is out there in the environment, we'll be able to assess the level of interaction that the proposed wind farm will have. And at that stage then, if any mitigation measures are required to minimise these impacts, then they will be identified. So that brings me on then to my final slide just on fisheries. So this is a key area for us in terms of stakeholder engagement, and we appointed a team of fisheries liaison officer back in 2019, and they've been engaging with fishermen and women in the area for well over 18 months now. We are committed to coexistence with the fishing community throughout all stages of this proposed project. Input from the fishing industry will play a key role in how we plan our surveys, first of all, in the actual design then of the wind farm, and then in the identification of appropriate mitigation measures if required as the project progresses. Over the past 18 months, we've been carrying out peer visits in the locality, so all the way from Kilmore Quay across to Ballycotton to hear the views, the concerns and also the needs of the local fishing communities. We have prepared and circulated project updates, survey briefing documents and FAQs to the fishing industry as a direct result of this engagement. And in addition to the knowledge gained during these discussions, as I mentioned previously, we're doing these monthly fishing activity or afloat surveys. And we're doing these in conjunction with local fishermen to better understand the level, the pattern and seasonality of fishing in the area. This will help us to plan our survey activities in a way that can avoid or reduce the level of interaction that we would have with day-to-day fishing activities. The information gathered is also going to be key to the EIA. And this will include specific topics on fish and shellfish ecology, on commercial and recreational fisheries, and on aquaculture. A longer-term coexistence strategy will then be developed and agreed with local fishing interests, and this will identify measures to mitigate any potential impacts once the project is further progressed. From our engagements to date, we're hearing on the ground that fishermen just want to keep fishing, and they will be able to do that. We want to see both industries thrive and complement each other, and we'll be exploring ways to achieve this. Further then to the specific project level engagement that we're currently doing, we're looking forward to playing a key role in the industry level engagement to be facilitated by the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage in the coming months. This group aims to establish a framework for communication and set up guidelines for interaction between the fisheries and the offshore renewable industries to identify opportunities for mutually beneficial coexistence and to agree best practice measures going forward. So I'll hand you over now to Rosie.
Thanks, Caroline. Hello, I'm Rosie Billingham. I'm a Community Engagement Manager. So I work with local stakeholders across our wind farms, our onshore wind farms and our other renewable energy projects. And that's through the early development, it's through planning, construction and throughout operation. So as you've already heard, this is our first official consultation period. We have been engaging, since 2019, but we're hoping that the next stages of public consultation that we will be able to follow public health guidance, but hold those in person because we believe firmly that face-to-face engagement, there's nothing like it. And that's why our dedicated liaison officers, as you've been hearing from Caroline, have been meeting people on the ground. Yes, they've been holding virtual briefings as well, but they've been meeting people on the ground. They are available to contact, to arrange a meeting. They're holding briefings. Those information services involve newsletters that you can sign up to, and obviously updates on the website. Talking about the website, if you look look here to the right of your screen, you can see just an image really of our virtual community hall exhibition. Right now that's on our website. So if you go to our website, you can click and enter a virtual community hall to walk around, look at the banners, read information, and you can also see some very, very early visualizations of what the offshore wind farm might look like from shore, because we've been asked about that a lot. But as I say, we're at this very early stage of development. Moving on to the next slide. Do remember, though, that we have got some of your questions in already, but please be sending them in via text or email. Now, we have had a question in already. We've been asked about community investment and the government's Renewable Electricity Support Scheme, or RES. In terms of offshore, what a local community benefit fund would look like. We do know that this is going to be, as Owen said, a multi-million euro annual community benefit fund. The details of how offshore RES community benefit funds will operate, they're only in draft form at this stage. The government has yet to finalise them. But I can tell you that Energia, we have a long history of supporting communities where we operate through community benefit funds, and it's our ambition to create a lasting legacy for the local communities. We've received, as I say, a few questions about this, and one of the questions is how our offshore funds will be managed. Well, we'll be following best practice, and obviously in terms of the requirements of the Renewable Electricity Support Scheme, we'll be following those. They've yet to be finalised, but all Energia's community benefit funds, our wind farm funds, are currently administered by third-party, independent, experienced, charitable foundations. So we work in partnership, not just with the community, but with these foundations to benefit really from their good governance, their experience, their accountability, their transparency, their ability really to signpost community groups to match funding, which is all important these days with major infrastructure projects. And it's important to remember that each and every one of these funds is different because they're designed and run in partnership and collaboration with the local community. And that means all sections of the local community. So we've got some examples here on the next slide, just so that I can talk through some of the funds we're already running, because Energia owns and operates 15 onshore wind farms across the island of Ireland. And, we're investing, close to 600,000 euro now every year. We've got last year up to 100 community groups benefited, huge reach of 58,000 people. And our overall investment to date in these funds is approaching 2 million euro. But obviously with an offshore community benefit fund, that would be, as Owen said, a multi-million annual fund. Example here, it's a new scheme, a student bursary scheme. You can see a photograph there of Jamie Cusker. He's now getting his tuition fees paid for his BA in education. That's made a real difference to him, and that was an idea that came from the community, for the community. St Eunan's National School, they received a grant for project changing rooms, and it wasn't just for the school. This is a state-of-the-art project in a small rural community, and that brings together in partnership a lot of local community groups. Finally, you've got an example there of Knox Community Association. They received a large fund spread over 5 years, but that was to develop a boardwalk around a local loch so that all the family could enjoy it effectively. So those are some of the examples of our community benefit funds, but I'm going to hand over now to our partnership manager, Amy, and she can talk about what we're doing in and around Waterford.
Thanks, Rosie. Hi, everyone. I'm Amy O'Shaughnessy, and I look after our brand partnerships at Energia. And I just want to quickly touch on some of our ongoing activity in the Waterford area. So as Derek mentioned earlier, we have been supplying energy in Ireland since 1999. And as well as all of our home and business customers, we do supply much of Ireland's most important infrastructure, like all of our streetlights, many hospitals, some of the major communications networks, and around a third of all the country's SMEs. So I guess what's really important to us is to try and make a positive impact in the communities that we serve at a local level. And we have a number of brand partnerships that help us to do that. So one of our longest standing partners actually is GIY, Grow It Yourself in Waterford. I'm sure many of you might be aware of them, and they're fantastic Grow HQ out there by the hospital in Waterford City. And we've been running the Energia Get Ireland Growing campaign with GIY now since 2016. And that encourages people to live more sustainably by growing some of their own food, both at home and in their communities. And we've always had lots of interest locally in this, actually. We've supported quite a number of local groups. Some of the schools in Waterford, like St. Paul's in Lisduggan, there was Scull Lorcan in St. John's Park. We've supported the recovery garden out of the hospital. We've funded the Solus Cancer Support Centre garden, and a lot of small community groups as well on top of that. So one of our other partnerships is Seachtain na Gaeilge, Le Energia. That's also been on the go for a good few years now. We're heading into Bliana Shea at the moment. And of course, we know Tá Teanga Bio I Bort Larga, agus bhína lán imeachtaí ar siúl I rinne bhéile gach bliain I Bort Larga, cosú le ceol agus céilethe agus fiú ceachtainna ar fála as Gaeilge. And then finally, we're delighted that we've recently announced a sustainable energy partnership with Waterford Chamber, and we've committed to supporting their goal to make Waterford Ireland's first decarbonised city. And so we're currently working on a plan of activity over the coming months with them. And that's it from me.
Thanks, Amy. I think we're on to the last slide now, and this is really just to urge everyone, if you haven't already visited our website and looked at that virtual community hall exhibition, please do leave your feedback. You can contact our liaison officers, but right now we're here to answer your questions. And as I say, we've received quite a few, so we're going to start with a question for you, Owen. It's a question from Oren and Nicholas, and it's about the connection to the grid. Will the connection to the grid be overground or underground?
Thanks, Rosie. Yeah, so at this point, we haven't determined where we can potentially connect to. So what we're doing at the moment is we're undertaking a number of surveys and studies. I suppose what we can definitively confirm is that it'll be an underground connection. So that export route cable that leaves the overall array area and is buried right out to the landfall point, and then that connects with an underground cable. But we're working with EirGrid to understand where we could potentially connect to, and where that connection point may be. So we haven't determined where that would be at this stage, but it's part of our process. And when we move forward with that and start to put more detail around that and move that through the planning process, that will come into later public consultations as well.
So we've got questions coming in about a substation. Will there need to be a substation onshore?
So it's somewhat related in that at this stage we haven't been able to determine where exactly that we'd be connecting, but I suppose ultimately our intent is to utilize existing infrastructure as much as possible. So it hasn't been determined if a new substation would be required, but ideally for this project we connect into an existing substation or to an existing overhead line. But again, once we get more detail on that in terms of the infrastructure requirements, that will be part of our grid connection study, and again that goes into our planning process, which would be covered in later public consultation that we'll undertake initially next year and then later on in 22 as well.
And what about, asks Alistair, when will there be an operations and maintenance facility, and where is it going to be located?
So the O&M facility would be part of the overall construction of the project, and it would obviously need to be ready in advance of completion of the project if we got to that stage. So at the moment we're assessing a number of the ports in the area, and I suppose there's two characteristics to this. One, it needs to be near the offshore wind farm, because we need to be able to get out to the offshore wind farm with relative ease. But the second element is we're not as constrained from an operations perspective in terms of the characteristics that we'd need as compared with the construction port. So we've looked at ports like Dunmore East, Dungarvan, Waterford, Bellevue, and potentially looking at the suitability of each of those ports. So that assessment's ongoing, and we'd look to have that complete probably in the next 12 to 18 months.
There's a question here for you, Caroline, because we're getting questions in on noise. We are grouping questions together where we can. So Linda, Jim, Paul, just to mention just a few, have asked about noise. How will you be assessing noise and potential impacts on marine life?
Thanks, Rosie. So yeah, look, there's a few different elements in relation to noise, and first of all, to say they will all be addressed by noise experts in the EIA. So the first is airborne noise, and there will be noise generated during the construction phase. It'll be modelled and it'll be assessed as part of the EIA. The noise levels from that construction site will have to comply with all environmental legislation, as do noise levels from all construction sites. So this will be no different to that. From the operational turbines, then we'll also be examining the noise coming from those. It is worth noting that given the distance from shore, the experience from other wind farms at similar distances, that the noise will not be heard on the shoreline at a distance of 10 kilometres. The other element then on noise is underwater noise. And again, look, there's going to be construction noise, and the EIA will be looking at the potential impacts not only on marine mammals, but also on fish, on shellfish, on seabirds, and all other marine life. And this will be examined by noise experts and by marine ecologists. When we know the foundation types and the installation methods for those foundations, and when we know the species that are in the area and we know the hearing abilities of those different species, we can then devise mitigation measures that will minimise the noise impacts where it's required. And there is a variety of different mitigation options, from bubble curtains to isolation casings that can be used during the construction phase, depending on the requirements. It's also worth remembering that already there are noise guidelines in place for these types of activities in Irish waters, and we will be complying with those. On operational noise, then underwater noise from the operational turbines. So the evidence to date is that from all operational wind farms, and there are many of them, is that there is no significant impact on marine mammals or other marine fauna. The oceans are very noisy places. There's many other sources of underwater noise from shipping, military sonar, etc. And the noise coming from operating turbines is very minimal compared to these sources. So there's no evidence that we're aware of that points to any impact from operational turbines on marine mammals. And in fact, there's a recent study in the US, I think it's on the Block Island wind farm, that has shown that at distances of 50 metres from operational turbines, the noise is at background levels, or in some cases not even measurable due to noise from sound from waves and boats. And look, at all that being said, this is an area that we're going to be looking at closely, as will all of the environmental features of this project. We want to develop this project in an environmentally sensitive and sustainable way, and to help to protect and enhance the environment. So I hope that addresses that, Rosie.
Well, we've got a question now on aquaculture, and it's from Kate. Kate says, I'd like to understand the mitigation measures incorporated into the project from the early stages to alleviate the potential impact of sediment dispersion on shellfish stocks and aquaculture sites.
Okay, so I suppose the first thing to say is that there will be no surveys or activities within any aquaculture sites. Okay, there will be some sediment dispersion from the construction activities, and the fate of those sediments will be assessed as part of the EIA, and we'll do that by collecting sediment samples. So this will tell us the sediment type and the distribution in the area. We'll then be developing what's called a sediment dispersion model, where we will determine where the suspended sediments will go and where they will settle out. And once we know that, we'll then be able to determine the potential impacts, not only on shellfish sites, on aquaculture sites, but also on spawning and nursery areas, on protected habitats, and on amenity areas. And at that stage, then, when we know the impacts, we'll be able to determine what mitigation measures would be required, and then these will be incorporated into the construction methodologies for the project. It's worth noting that, given the distance from shore that the turbines and the wind farm would be, it's extremely unlikely that there will be any impact on the inshore aquaculture sites from the construction activities at that distance. Where the cable cars will come ashore, there will be a rise in suspended sediments, potentially closer to aquaculture sites, depending on where the routes are, and this would be considered very carefully, and as I said, appropriate mitigation measures will be put in place at that time.
We've got a lot of questions, I have to say, coming in on visuals. A lot of people asking, what are we going to see from shore? So, Owen, got a question here from Patricia and Louisa. Why is this project being planned within a distance, they say, where the turbines are going to be visible rather than further out to sea?
Yeah, thanks, Rosie. So I suppose in the consultation room, we've provided photo illustrations, and that gives, I suppose, an idea of what the project could look like. It's certainly not what the project will look like. It's really just to give a view of where we are at this stage, and looking at the area that's still of interest for us. I think it goes back to that point of the location of offshore wind farms, and it's driven by a number of factors, including seabed type, but important to this is water depth. So fixed foundations have a have a limit of 65 meters, and that's the sort of water depth that we're out right when we go to the very southern extent of the area that we're currently surveying. And fixed bottom foundations have delivered over 99% of offshore wind globally to date. So it's the proven technology. Out beyond that, you're looking at floating technology. And I think that the key point there is the projects that have been developed from a floating perspective can't deliver at scale. And the real impact of that over the next 10 years is that a floating project can't deliver at the scale that's required for Ireland to meet its 2030 targets and for its carbon emission reductions. So we're assessing all of the area that we're currently looking at, and that goes from 40 meters right out to 65 meters. But around the coast of Ireland, we don't have available sea areas that go out much beyond 20 kilometers that are in the suitable depth for fixed bottom foundations. And as a result, we need to develop fixed bottom sites, because that's what will deliver at scale for the 5 gigawatt target for Ireland's 2030 targets. So hopefully that covers it, Rosie.
I've got one here for Derek, and this is about tourism. Now, I'm grouping these questions together. Questions about Waterford, the Copper Coast as a popular tourist destination, with a lot of visitors coming to the coastal areas, to the Greenway, to the UNESCO Geopark. So how is this offshore project, people are asking, going to impact on local tourism?
Thanks, Rosie, and thanks for the question. I mean, I think what we know is, I suppose, offshore wind in Ireland is new. I mean, there's one project that's there quite a while, but this is new, and there are concerns in coastal communities around Ireland, particularly South and East Coast, about what impact these projects will have. Now, from our perspective, we recognise those concerns, but this is why we're having such an early stage consultation. We want to understand what those concerns are. Now, Waterford obviously has developed a really strong tourism economy, and this is going to be really important, and the cultural and heritage aspects of the project and their impact will be fully assessed in the EIA report. So we need to talk to people and get feedback on what those concerns are. We need to measure them, we need to look at them, we need to understand them. Now, what I would say though, looking elsewhere in other countries, and particularly if I marry this back to Waterford, where, as you mentioned, with the Geopark and with the Greenway, Waterford has established a really strong sustainability or ecotourism type market. Now, this is a really growing sector. In a recent a recent Geopark in Denmark, it was only designated a Geopark of over 5,000 square kilometers, I think it is, this year in West Jutland. They celebrate the fact that the wind farms are just off the coast. That really this fits fully with the ethos of the Geopark. It is about understanding the effects of climate change and how we can drive change in order to mitigate or completely mitigate any further damage and change those effects. So there are examples elsewhere where this opportunity and this move towards both not just a greener country, but a greener and ecotourist type model has brought dividends. So we're hopeful through the consultation and everything else that we identify where this is also possible in Waterford, and that we work with the industry through hopefully the development of this project to bring those opportunities to bear.
Another one for you, Derek, actually. Mark, amongst others, wants to know who's going to benefit from the development. Is the project being subsidised by public funds?
Okay, so, I mean, back to my earlier remarks, who's going to benefit? Well, Ireland's going to benefit without doubt. Right? This is a huge challenge that we need to, in terms of decarbonisation. Us achieving our targets has really profound benefits, not just for the environment, but for every business who's going to face these challenges, be it through regulation or changes in the normal environment or how we go about our day-to-day work, right? So there's real dividends for Ireland out of this, and as Owen's already touched on, there's also a really strong local economic component to this project. I mean, not least, the O&M facilities that will have to be installed will require 30-year jobs. right? So for local people to be able to service these wind farms out into the future, as well as very significant community benefit contributions and local money going into the development and continued operation of the wind farms. So there's a lot of benefit, I think, in that. But almost back to the scale of these investments and the investment that's required, this is in and around a €2 billion project. Ireland's 5 gigawatt target is going to require something in the order of 15 billion in order for us to get there. Now, what we know is the model that will be used here, and this is to the public funds aspect of the question, is only the cheapest projects are going to proceed, because the way the offshore renewable electricity support scheme works is that it's an auction. And all projects participate in the auction, and only the cheapest ones come out. Now, when I say cheapest, it is for companies to engage in the auction and put in the price that they can live with. Now, how that operates then in time is that those projects get paid that amount of money. And if the price in the market is greater than that price in which they entered into their contract, then they pay it back. And as an example of how that works in the renewable electricity support scheme that's operating onshore this year, it's expected that those projects will actually pay back to consumers as opposed to take money. Now, why is this structure important, and why are we looking to offshore renewable electricity, and why has Ireland set up an offshore renewable electricity support scheme? It's about keeping the costs down. It provides certainty to make these investments. And as I said, there'll be loads of opportunity for people. I mean, the scale of this challenge is immense. There'll be loads of opportunity for people to change their own behaviours at home, invest in retrofitting, invest in EVs where they can. These huge infrastructure projects that are transformational for Ireland will require significant investment. And as I said, the reason we're getting into this is the future of our sector. And so that's why we're doing it. But it is a model which has operated in Ireland for many years now, where through either the renewable electricity feed-in tariff or now through the renewable electricity support scheme, the cheapest projects come forward, they're funded, and they operate, and they help to contribute to the achievement of Ireland's renewable electricity targets.
I've got a question in. Now, this one was sent in earlier. It's for you, Caroline. It's quite specific, but it's about surfing. It's been sent in by David and Bella. They want to know the potential impacts that an offshore wind farm will have on the surfing areas of the Waterford coast.
Thanks, Rosie. Yeah, look, there are situations where when you add new infrastructure into the marine environment, it can affect, waves and currents. And these are typically associated with large solid structures like harbour walls or pier extensions, where they can change the current patterns around the structure. The wave energies can get absorbed and sediment deposition patterns can change. So we're fully aware of that. And we're also fully aware of the surfing activity in Tramore and Bunmahon. This will be addressed in the EIA. And we'll be doing that by, first of all, collecting data on wind speed, on current speed and direction, and on wave height. We'll use this data then to develop what's called a hydrodynamic model, and this will examine the wave climate, what it's like currently in the area, and what it would be like then if the wind farm was installed, and what the difference between those two would be. And from experience on other offshore wind farms, it has been noted that unlike with these large solid harbour walls or pier extensions, the wave disturbance caused by wind turbines is generally very small. And this is due to, first of all, the size of the wind turbines themselves, the distance between the turbines, and then the actual overall distance of the wind farm to shore. But look, it is something we will be fully assessing as part of the EIA.
Thanks, Caroline. Owen, you touched on employment opportunities. Alistair wants to know what skill sets are required for the operation phase of this offshore wind farm.
Yeah, so I suppose direct jobs in terms of those 70 to 100, there's a lot of different and a broad scope on those. So that'd be sort of management jobs, engineering jobs, turbine technicians, admin jobs, and maritime jobs. So a certain amount of those we have we have in Ireland, and then another subset of those we need to develop. So those are skill sets that we're looking at and looking at where we may face a shortfall when we go to develop out this project. So we're working both at a wider industry level, and that's like we've already seen the National Maritime College have increased the number of places for for training specific to offshore wind. But then we're also looking at it individually on a project basis. And I suppose the benefit is we have a maritime culture and history in Ireland. So there's a lot of people that are involved in offshore projects abroad, and they're looking to come back. And then there's also a lot of companies in Ireland, both having established themselves over the last number of years to address this, but also being active in the market for the last number of years. And it's about how do we adapt those skills so that they can become suitable for offshore operations. So I'd say the skill sets that we need are quite broad. I've gone into the darkness here. The skill sets that we need are quite broad, but we certainly have time to develop them, and it's something we're really actively looking at, both individually and at a wider industry level.
Now, we've received a fair number of questions about project location. That's from Kate and Emmett. That's something you've already touched on, Owen. But if I can group questions together, just because we're coming to the end of the hour. Questions also coming in. What impact would a 22-kilometre exclusion zone from the shore have on the offshore industry?
Yeah, so the 22-kilometre, I think that the impact, the direct impact of that would be that we wouldn't be able to develop fixed bottom projects, which means that Ireland won't meet its 2030 targets and won't meet that carbon emission reduction. I think when we look at international experience, there's almost a third of the projects that have been delivered. So I think it's between 60 and 65 projects that have been delivered within that 22 kilometres. And then there's a further 16 gigawatts, so 3 times what Ireland's trying to do by 2030, that are either in planning or have applied for planning, again within that 22 kilometres. So we aren't at odds with European norms, and I think for us it's really about, we don't have the depth when we go out beyond 22 kilometres to develop fixed bottom projects, and those are the projects that we need to deliver at scale for the 2030 targets, because Ireland has that target, and that's what we need to deliver the scale.
We've been asked about turbines, where they're going to be located, what depth, what height, the distance, minimum distance. You mentioned 10 kilometres.
Yeah, so it's at this stage it's certainly no closer than 10 kilometres, but there's an area there that we're currently assessing, and that area is ultimately going to be larger, or it is larger at the moment than we'll ultimately build out in terms of a project if it gets through all the hurdles that it would have to get through. So it'll be smaller than the current area that we're assessing, a minimum of 10 kilometres, but again, we're surveying right out to that 25 kilometre boundary on the southern side. So it's the surveys that we'll be undertaking that Caroline mentioned in relation to the ground surveys and the environmental surveys. Those are the ones that will determine where it's suitable, as well as lots of other factors that get fed into the environmental impact assessment as well.
And what about decommissioning, asks Brian, at the end of life of this project?
Yeah, so decommissioning's it's something, even though it's obviously at the end of the 25 or 30 year design period or life of the project, it's something that we have to assess at this very early stage, and it actually gets built into our planning application and our environmental impact assessment. So we'll be looking at not only how you build the project, but when the project reaches its sort of end of life, how you decommission that and how you take things apart, and that's assessed even at the very early stages that we're at, and then it's really about how you agree with the various licensing authorities and on board Planola as to how that fits into the project. So it's something that has to be assessed right at the very outset and is part of our planning application.
A question's come in, I suppose that I can answer here. It's just asking about, what we're planning for sort of post-COVID engagement. As we've tried to emphasize, here tonight, Energia, we're really committed to genuine engagement, and we understand the importance of building long-lasting relationships with the communities where we operate and our neighbours. So this is the first official consultation period, but as I say, our dedicated liaison officers are available to contact, to organise a meeting, a face-to-face meeting. We're hoping that the next stages of our public consultation following public health guidance participants will be face to face, but in the meantime, the message we really want to get across here tonight is that, you know, our engagement is ongoing. We have dedicated project liaison officers, our fisheries liaison officer, our community liaison officer, and, you know, the contact details, you know, we'll put up at the end here for you to contact, whether it be by phone, via email, or you can, you know, phone to, you know, request a call back to organise a meeting. You know, we want to hear from you, we want to engage, and we believe in the importance of face-to-face engagement. We're just heading to the end of the hour, so that really is all that, you know, we have time, you know, for tonight, but we have tried to group your questions together. We have been getting we had questions in advance. We've been getting questions in, you know, throughout tonight. We've tried to group them together and address the issues that you've raised. As Derek said at the opening, that we're going to, use those questions. We're going to supply answers to the questions you haven't got to tonight. We're going to update our FAQs, our frequently asked questions, on our website. And this webinar, there'll be a recording of it. It'll be available to view for anyone who's missed it on the website. So please do go to the website. In the meantime, I hope you found this sort of question and answer session useful. As I say, it's the first. It's only the first. I'm going to hand back, just to close, I'm going to hand back to our Head of Corporate Affairs, Derek Scully. But thank you again for joining us.
Thanks, Rosie, and thanks to Owen, Caroline, Amy as well for the presentation. And importantly, I suppose just a thank you to everybody who's taken the time to join us tonight. I know we probably haven't got to every question, but as I said at the outset, we will be providing a Q&A alongside the webinar that will be up on the website. I invite you all to continue to look at the website, go through the room, continue to provide your feedback. It is very important to us. If you want to engage with us further, obviously there's that opportunity to book one-to-ones in the week coming up, but also to continue to engage with our CLO or FLO and based on any concerns that you might have. This is, as we said at the outset, only the first consultations at a very early stage. So as the guys outlined, we will be coming back to you with other opportunities to discuss, and hopefully with more information and the opportunity to get into a room, as Rosie said, all together. So this, I suppose, in conclusion, offshore wind is new. We understand the need to engage. We have a long-standing history in engaging with local communities. It's important to us, right? You guys on the phone, the high street you walk down, the shop you shop in, are all possible customers of ours, and customers that we've had for possibly up to 20 years, right? This is what we do. It's so important to us that we are in engagement with people, and across the entire business, we want to be open and discuss these issues with you. So we're hopefully going to be in the area for a long time. We're hopefully going to provide those benefits. And as I said, what we will continue to do is engage with you. So please just reach out to us if you want. And I think the point that really strikes me is, whether it's this project or not, the change we're all going to go through in the next 10 years is very, very significant. And we need to find easy ways in which we can all make active decisions to make that happen. Again, as a company, we're committed to doing that. Our focus is on our customers and our focus is on renewables, and we're very clear that the climate action is essential, and that we're in a climate crisis. So this is, to us, a really important transition. We want to lead in this space, and really I just want to take this opportunity again just to thank you all and invite you all to please keep talking to us, and I look forward to seeing you all as we progress through with this project at future consultations.